my guest, Judge Wallace Hoggatt. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about his background because it's very impressive and I don't want to miss anything. So
oh, well,
welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me, Linda. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, Dr. Denno gave you a title, judge. I'm actually retired. I retired at the end of December of last year after 22 years and 8 months, but who's counting, as a judge of the Superior Court. That's a state court. We sit in counties. I'm here in Cochise County. And it was a very, very productive and interesting and educational period of time to serve as a judge in this county. My court, the Superior Court, is the court of general jurisdiction, so that when someone wants to sue somebody else for breach of contract or a product that caused damage, or somebody gets prosecuted for most kinds of crimes, which are felonies, that's where the case goes, the Superior Court. Now, before I was a judge of the Superior Court, I was a lawyer in private practice, and also I was the first public defender for Cochise County.
Really?
That was in the mid-1980s. I was the first one. I set up the office, and then other people have taken over after I've left. And I'm just happy to be here. I have taught classes at the local community college, Cochise College, in the past. It's been a while, but I'm looking forward to undertaking that again.
Yes, I forgot to mention that Judge Hoggatt is going to be teaching a really important course in our Administration of Justice program in the fall, and hopefully he'll like it enough to stay on beyond that, a class in the American judicial process, which will cover all of his experience. And one of the interesting things about Judge Hoggatt is that he's actually quite what's the word? You're the Renaissance man.
Oh, am I?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
I've had several dealings with Judge Hoggatt in the past, but a very interesting one had to do with a panel that he chaired here at UA South on Shakespeare and the law.
I did do that.
Yes.
So, your colleague, Dr. DiRoberto, was kind enough to invite me and a number of other people from the court system. Oh gosh, I don't have a roster of all those who were involved, but a number of people involved in either prosecuting cases or defending cases or representing clients. And it was very interesting. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
This is not really on the list of things, but I've got to ask. So before you set up the Office of Public Defender, what did Cochise County do?
We had basically a list. I'm not sure how strongly it was adhered to, but you know, if you were next on the list, okay, Mr. Hoggatt, it looks like you haven't had a case for a while. You get to represent John Doe, who's facing certain charges. And they would pay you. It wasn't quite completely pro bono, but the rates were considerably reduced.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. And I enjoyed that work, notwithstanding the fact that you didn't get rich doing those cases. And so when we were allowed by the legislature to create our own public defender's office, I applied for the job and was fortunate enough to get it.
So that might allow me to get back on track and talk a little bit more about the experience that led you to decide to become a judge. I'll point out for his sake that judges in Arizona are elected. They are not appointed. Well, they are not appointed. I'll let you.
Yeah, actually some judges are appointed. The appellate judges are, and the Superior Court judges in the big counties, the ones with most population, Maricopa, which is Phoenix, Pima, which is Tucson, and Pinal, which is Florence and Casa Grande. But all the other Superior Court judges, as well as the Justice Court JPs, Justices of the Peace, were all elected. In my case, I was initially appointed by the governor back in spring of 1996 to fill a vacancy. And then under the law, I had to, if I wanted to keep the job, I had to run immediately. You know, welcome to the job. Now, if you want to keep it, go get some petitions signed and get yourself on the ballot. And I was fortunate enough to be able to accomplish that and get elected to the balance of my predecessor's unexpired term. And then thereafter, I was elected 5 times after that initial time, 5 more times.
I like to point, I was just
yeah,
gonna say, I like
ahead.
to point out to my students that, as I recall, the only qualification for being a justice of the peace is that you be a citizen of the state of Arizona and 18 years old.
Or older, right.
Or older,
Yeah.
yes.
And not have a felony conviction.
Not
right.
have, right. But no
right.
law experience required, nothing.
That's true. That's true. And we have had JPs in this county and other counties who are law trained and some who had not been law trained. Also city magistrates. It depends on the particular city or town which appoints those magistrates as to whether they're required to be legally trained or not. But, you know, I appeared before a lot of JPs, a lot of city magistrates, and, you know, a couple of them that I recall, I won't mention names, but a couple of them that I recall who were not legally trained were very, very good judges. And I was always convinced if I went before that judge, I'd get a fair shake. My client would get a fair shake. But you know, that's up to people to decide. Do you want to require legal training for JPs and for magistrates? That's a decision each person will have to make for himself or herself. But anyway, to go back to part of the question that you asked, what made me want to become a judge? I've been asked that question a lot because as a judge, we would often get high school students, or we used to say junior high, that's not what they call it anymore, middle school students who would come in and they'd look at proceedings, and then if time permitted, and usually it did, we'd talk with them after the proceedings. And oftentimes I'd be asked that question, gee, why did you become a judge? Why did you want to be a judge? That's probably the second or third most common question after how often do you use the hammer, meaning the gavel, and how much do you get paid? I mean, those were really the first 2 questions. But the third one, usually in frequency, was why did you want to become a judge? And the simplest answer I could give them, and the simplest answer I can give anybody, is because I wanted to do my part to see that justice was done and is done in particular cases. And you know, I thought that if I had the role, I could make sure, as far as possible, as far as the law and facts would permit, that I could reach a just and fair result.
Okay. Well, and then let me follow on with that. We were talking about how you don't necessarily need legal training to be a justice of the peace, at least in some jurisdictions. But what can you tell me about, say, a student who graduates from an administration of justice program at the University of Arizona South? What kind of opportunities would there be for a student generally in the field, the fields that you've been a part of over your professional career?
Well, there are a lot of different areas in which a graduate of UA South, the program here, could get into. Probation departments, law enforcement, corrections. One might apply to law school to be admitted to become a lawyer. Someone might be involved in support positions for lawyers.
Or courts.
Or courts, that's absolutely true, particularly since we are seeing, not only in Arizona, but throughout the country, a rise in specialty courts, you know, drug courts, veterans courts, mental health courts. I even saw recently, and I wanted the chance to explore it further, but I never got the chance. But I saw that in New York City they have gun courts, at least in Brooklyn. I assume in the other boroughs in New York. I'm not sure exactly what they do, but that is yet another example of specialty courts that are created to meet a particular need. Talking about, for example, drug courts, and here in Cochise County we do in fact have drug courts both for adults and for juveniles. Drug courts are set up not to replace regular court proceedings in which someone, for example, will be put on probation, but as an adjunct to as a supplement to the workings of the courts. For example, if there is someone who has a serious drug problem, and I hate to say it, but so many of our cases, whether they are criminal in nature or domestic in nature, do have a kind of drug or alcohol use component. But if you have someone who has a serious drug problem and who is, as a consequence thereof, involved in a lot of the, I'd say low level, except they're not low level to the people involved, but they're involved in a certain degree of criminal conduct which is related to their drug use. It can happen, and often does happen, that a judge, as I used to be up until December 28th of last year, could at sentencing put somebody on probation, and then either at that point, if a screening has been done by drug court, or at a later point, a screening can be done to see, is this person appropriate for drug court? Then they go into drug court, and there's a more frequent invitation, let's put it, to that person to come back, whether once a week, once every 2 weeks, or some other period of time. And there is a drug court judge who is a real judge, and that's staffed rather heavily by people involved in social services, probation, prosecutor's staff, defender's office staff, and those people, along with the judge, will, ahead of the drug court, staff those matters with the court and say, well, this guy, he's doing generally okay, but boy, is he tempted, and he's fallen off over here, and he needs shoring up in this direction, and that kind of thing. And so the judge will address that. I can see the need for, with the expansion of specialty courts, having more staff or people trained in particular things to assist. And that's particularly true with our veterans who may be suffering from either post-traumatic stress disorder or TBI, traumatic brain injury, or other problems relating to their service. And that's service for your country, my country, the country of all of us here, and we owe it to them.
Opioid addiction as a result.
Opioid addiction, absolutely. And that may be opioid addiction that came about because they were being legitimately treated for something else and it got out of hand, or for whatever reason. I think we owe it to our veterans to make sure they get the best care, and that includes not only medical care via the VA, but also legal care, if you want to put it that way, in our system, in trying to make sure that they can get the help they need. Not that anybody else should be treated more harshly if they're not veterans, but if they have been veterans, first of all, there are certain kinds of resources that are available to them. And second, as I say, I think all of us owe them a big debt.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because a number of our students are veterans.
Okay.
A number of the students in my programs are veterans. And so I like the idea that there are opportunities for veterans in this field to help other veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that this is a growing field. My market research I had to do for the field before I set up the program indicated that it was likely to, just to grow exponentially over the next several decades. So let me ask you this. We have a what I think is a pretty decent program for students, but what can they do in addition to their schoolwork, would you say, to kind of prepare themselves for all of these different opportunities in the field? If there's some sort of general kind of activities that you would recommend. I know we've talked about too many different options to say one thing in particular, but.
Well, there are a number of things I would recommend, depending on what any particular student may be interested in. But, the thing about professionals who are involved in the criminal justice system, or even in the civil justice system, is most of us, I can't speak for each and every person, but most of us are not only willing to, but are happy to talk to people about what we do. And so my suggestion to students or potential students who may be listening to this or watching this is, if you're interested in something, just ask somebody who is involved, what can I do to find out more? Let me give you an example, and then I'll give some other information. I would have, as I've mentioned over the years, I would have middle school or high school students. Usually that's arranged through their teachers, and they'd have a field trip and they'd come in and they'd talk to me. But I would also have other people who would simply come in to the court system, to a court session, and observe what's going on. One example is, a couple of years or so ago, we had a call from a student who said, I am a journalism student, not a BAS student, but still a journalism student who was interested in the court system. And her request was, I wonder if I could come in and watch what we call Law in Motion Day. That's when, a lot of stuff goes on. People plead guilty, people get sentenced, people have motions, all kinds of things happen. Can I come in and watch that, and then after it's over, talk to the judge and ask questions if I have them? And no one had ever put that question to me before, but that's no reason for anyone to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I said, sure. Actually, anyone, it doesn't matter if you call ahead or not, anyone can go into a court session, unless it's one of those very rare cases which is closed, like mental health commitment proceedings are closed, certain other things may be closed. But the vast majority of things that we do in the court system, those are open court. Anybody can go in. You don't have to pay money. You don't have to get a ticket. Don't go on Ticketmaster. You don't even have to call ahead the way that student did. And you can sit in the back and you can watch whatever goes on. What this student did in asking for my time, and I was happy to give it because I had the time after I was done, and I spoke with her. There are obviously certain things we can't talk about. I mean, I can't start giving my opinion about this case or what's going to happen or anything like that, but in terms of the procedure and why was it that you asked certain questions of that person, a lot of things I could answer and I did answer, and anyone could do that if you find someone who is willing to talk. I would suggest, if someone is interested in, for example, going to law school, or even if you're not, even if you want to, maybe you want to be a probation officer, maybe you want to be a law enforcement officer, a detective, for example, but you want to know, why are these people doing these things this way? If, for example, you call up the local county attorney's office or the local public defender or legal defender, which is a similar kind of office, or now we have an office of legal advocate, which is yet another kind of similar agency. You call them up and say, hey, I'm just a student, but I'd like to find out more about this. I wonder if I went to a certain court session and watch what was going on, could I have a half an hour or an hour of your time to talk to you afterwards to find out what's going on? Now, again, the attorney who's involved may have restrictions on what he or she can say. You know, can't talk about confidences of the client, other things, but certainly in terms of the procedure, why did that judge say that? Why did that judge set the hearing ahead and not do it at that time? That can be done. Also, if someone is interested in going into law enforcement, or again, if you're not, even if you're not, but you want to know what the field of law enforcement is all about, why are the police taking certain positions on what they should do. Most law enforcement agencies, at least most of the ones I know about, have ride-along programs. Many of the others have other kinds of programs like internships. I talked to the Cochise County Sheriff, Mark Denny, who's very accommodating with his time. I talked to him yesterday, and he said that we have a great deal of opportunities for students and others, members of the public, but also students who are interested to pursue it. And he suggested that anyone who was interested, whether for ride-along or internship or other programs, and they have scholarship programs too. I can't vouch for exactly what they cover, but I understand they have them. Anyone who is interested might get a hold of Carol Kappas, C-A-P-A-S, who is their public information officer. Go online, get her contact information. I know also the Sierra Vista Sierra Vista Police Department has a Citizens Police Academy, which is a 12-week academy. Go online, check that out. A few years ago, was invited to speak to that group, and it was really interesting. There are people from all walks of life, retired folks, people who are still working. I saw a few younger people who might have been students, didn't ask them, I don't know. But most people, in my experience, who are involved with the law, the court system, are willing and sometimes even happy to talk to people who just want to know. Again, there are things that may be forbidden in terms of topics of conversation, but there's a lot that can be talked about. So if anyone is really interested, just think about it this way. If you don't know whether a particular agency, probation department, or border patrol or something, if you don't know whether they might be able to help you out, I'd say call them. I'd say call them, because if you never call them, then that is functionally a negative answer. For all practical purposes, they've told you no, even though you've never called them. So if you call them and they say yes, you've got a different answer. Even if you call and they say, we don't have time for you, then at least you've checked and you're no worse off than you were before.
And I had a coffee with Mark the other day, and a supervisor from the Highway Patrol, Department of Public Safety.
Department of Public
I always
Safety,
get them
right.
confused. California girl. And both of them told me they're desperate. They're desperate for qualified people. They just can't get enough people into either the Sheriff's Department or the Department of Public Safety. So yes, there are lots of opportunities, and we're being told we're running out of time here. Do you have a last thing you might like to say about the most rewarding aspect of your career?
Well, in this field, and this is true whether you are a judge, whether you're an attorney, prosecuting attorney, defense attorney, or even if you're an attorney involved in certain kinds of civil cases, domestic cases, and also all the other support staff. You know, we tend to deal with folks who are, if not in crisis at the moment, we're dealing with whatever it was that put them into crisis maybe some time back. And if you can work within the law, if you can work according to whatever the facts are, to provide some kind of assistance to people who have been through something that they didn't usually want to go through. It wasn't their idea to be the victim of a crime. It wasn't their idea to get into a car accident with resulting serious injuries. Now, other people, yeah, they made conscious choices to do certain things that got them into court. But for many people, it wasn't their idea. And even the people who did decide to do something, they operated out of a crisis mentality oftentimes as well. And so if you can help that person with a view towards assessing responsibility and imposing consequences, but also trying to prevent future crises in that way that they've experienced already, that's a good thing. And it's a good thing whether you are a judge, a lawyer, a corrections officer, a law enforcement officer, a probation officer, support staff for lawyers, or a whole host of other kinds of professions that you might get into in the future. There are probably professions relating to the legal system that you and I don't know anything about because they haven't been created
Yes.
yet. But if you can help people within our legal system, you've done something good.
Thank you very much, Judge Hoggatt. I
Happy to
really
be here.
appreciate it.